I came back on a Monday. I remember because the plane landed just after dawn, and by the time I reached the front steps of my apartment, the sunlight had already spilled across the brick like someone had laid gold leaf on every edge. It should have felt like coming home. But the second I opened the door, I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. There was music, but not the kind you dance to. Drumming low and steady. A hum of voices, and the smell something earthy like sage or cedar heavy in the air. I stepped inside and froze. My living room had been transformed into a sacred circle. Dozens of women, some barefoot, others in linen shawls, sat cross-legged on floor cushions arranged around a candle-lit altar. Bowls of dried lavender and herbs sat on trays that used to hold my books. On the wall, where my father's framed photo had hung, was a printed banner that read, "Blessing way for Kelsey Mother to be light of our lineage. Kelsey Blake, my sister. Younger by 2 years, louder by instinct, and always someone who had a way of bending rooms around her without asking." She sat in the center of the circle belly round beneath a gauzy white dress, a crown of eucalyptus on her head. She looked like she'd found her throne, and she was seated on my meditation cushion. I hadn't seen Kelsey in over 2 months. The last time we spoke, she had texted me once, "Let us know when you're back from Seattle. Hope it's going okay?" That was 6 weeks ago while I was helping care for my late boyfriend's mother in hospice. A quiet goodbye for a woman I'd grown to love, and now it seemed the last quiet moment I'd have for a while. No one noticed me at first. Or maybe they did, and just didn't react. I stood at the doorway with my carry-on still in hand. A woman I didn't recognize looked up and smiled gently as if I were just another guest. She whispered, "Shoes off, love," then turned back to the ritual. I didn't move. Then my mother, Marjorie Blake, appeared from the kitchen. Pearl earrings, smooth blouse tucked into slacks that said, "Hostess with good intentions." She glanced at me just once, then stepped closer. "Just go with it," she said softly. "You weren't really using the place anyway." She took a folded cloth from the counter and handed it to me. I didn't take it, because suddenly I couldn't remember how long this had been happening. How long they'd been gathering in here in the place my father left to me. How long my name had stopped being on the door, even if the lease still said otherwise. ChatGPT said I didn't speak. I didn't take off my shoes. I just walked past the circle of humming women and headed down the hallway, wheeling my carry-on behind me like a thread that still connected me to something real. The door to my bedroom was half open. It smelled like baby powder and lavender oil. When I stepped inside, my breath caught. My bed frame was pushed to the corner, stripped bare. The walls were lined with stacked boxes labeled in pink marker newborn 3-6 months bottles wipes. A folded stroller leaned against the window. On my bookshelf, at least where it used to be, there was now a row of diaper bins and breast pump parts, some still in their packaging. They hadn't even tried to make it temporary. This wasn't a storage nook. This was a nursery supply room. I set my suitcase down slowly, then opened the closet. Gone. All of it. My blouses, my scarves, the cardigan I wore the day Dad died, replaced by onesies and plush toys. The only thing left on the top shelf was a box labeled Lauren Old, written in my mother's handwriting. I pulled it down and set it on the stripped bed. Inside were fragments of who I used to be. A pair of beat-up journals, one with the spine cracked from use, the other still half full. My copy of the things they carried, the one with the yellow post-it notes my father left me when I first said I wanted to be a writer. And at the very bottom, a letter-sized envelope unsealed, but still closed. I recognized it before I touched it. The envelope was off-white, thick with my name written in my father's sharp, blocky handwriting. I had left it behind in the nightstand for safekeeping while I was away, his final letter to me, written a week before his heart surgery. I never finished reading it. I told myself I'd wait until I was ready. And now it was lying in a box between old pens and tax papers. No reverence, no weight. Taped to the outside of the box was a small yellow sticky note. It read, "Shred." I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. Perfectly. In the next room, someone laughed, a deep, rich belly laugh, the kind Kelsey was famous for. I could hear the clinking of glass, a collective awe from the group as someone opened a gift. They were celebrating new life, and right here in this quiet, cleared-out room, mine had been packed away like it didn't matter. That night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet in the strangest way, like it had been taught to breathe without me. I sat on the edge of the stripped bed, the letter from my father unopened in my lap, while the muffled echoes of voices and laughter still pulsed through the walls. They were toasting Kelsey, chanting blessings, passing around herbal tea like holy water. I didn't belong in any of it, but this place, these walls, this floor had belonged to me. That much I was sure of. I turned on my laptop, fingers trembling more than I expected. The Wi-Fi still connected to my name, BlakeNet 5G. One last thing that hadn't been renamed. I opened my email. At the top of the inbox was a message from the building's management company. It had been forwarded from my tenant portal 2 weeks ago, tagged as action required. I hadn't seen it until now. Subject line Occupancy Transfer Verification Unit 3B, I clicked. Inside was a scanned PDF of a tenant change request form. It listed Kelsey Blake as the primary occupant, Marjorie Blake as secondary household contact, and the reason for change. Original tenant has vacated, unreachable for over 30 days. There was a signature at the bottom. Mine, slanted, sloppy, not mine. I stared at the curve of the L, the awkward hook on the B. It was a poor imitation, like someone had tried to copy my signature from memory and hadn't taken the time to get it right. But it had been enough for the form to pass through initial processing. If I hadn't opened that email, it might have gone through. They would have submitted follow-up documents. They would have shifted the lease, maybe even moved toward full ownership transfer if they kept pushing. And then legally, I really wouldn't have had a key anymore. My stomach turned cold. Not from betrayal. Betrayal requires surprise. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a move. While I'd been in Seattle brushing the hair of a dying woman who once called me the daughter she never had my own family, had been rewriting the script of my absence, turning my silence into consent, my stillness into surrender. The box with my journals still sat beside me. I reached down and pulled out the one with the broken spine. Inside on the first page were the words I wrote at 21. My voice matters even if it shakes. I stared at that line until the words blurred. Then I took a breath. Not a big one. Just enough to steady the tremble. Because now I knew. They weren't just moving in. They were moving me out. I wasn't sure what woke me, a change in light, the silence settling deeper, or just the weight of that signature. I stayed in bed staring at the envelope from my father like it might open itself. It didn't. So I did. The paper inside was thick. Old school. The kind you only use when you know the words matter. He'd dated it in the top right corner 2 weeks before his surgery. He hadn't told me he was writing anything, just said, "You'll find it if you need it." The letter wasn't long. He talked about the apartment. How he'd bought it years ago quietly with money he never told my mother he had set aside. How he wanted one of us to have something untouched by everyone else's decisions. He'd chosen me. You see things, he wrote, even when no one's looking. That's a kind of strength I never had. He said he knew Mom wouldn't understand, that she'd call it impractical, that she might even try to balance it out later like she always did. Don't let her convince you you're being selfish, he wrote. That's her trick. It always has been. I sat with the letter in my hands, the words bleeding into me like ink into water, and I remembered. The day after his funeral, while people were still bringing casseroles and condolences, my mother found the sealed envelope and handed it back to me. She leaned in and whispered, "Put that away, Lauren. Don't go making big decisions right now." She said it like a kindness, like a warning. I hadn't read the letter then. I just nodded and slipped it into a drawer. I'd spent years doing that, slipping parts of myself into drawers. Hopes, plans, reactions. Even the words I wanted to say but couldn't find air for. My mother never needed to raise her voice. She curated silence. She made it look reasonable. This wasn't new. It was just the first time she'd put it in writing. I looked over at the box again, at the post-it that read, "Shred." And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel the need to explain or ask if I was being too dramatic. I folded the letter gently, placed it back in the envelope, and stood up. My father had left me something. Now it was time to keep it. The next morning, I called an attorney. Not someone from the family, not Uncle Greg with his tired sighs and his, you know how your mother gets. I found a woman named Elaine Chen who specialized in estate law and tenancy disputes. She didn't ask why I waited this long. She just asked for the documents. I emailed her the deed, the trust copy my father had given me, and the scanned forgery. She called back within 2 hours. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on," she said. "You are the sole title holder. No sublease, no transfer paperwork. If you want to change the locks, do it today." So I did. By noon, a locksmith had replaced every keyhole. I watched the old keys drop into a canvas pouch, 3 little teeth no longer sharp. Then I moved through the apartment box by box, collecting everything that didn't belong to me. The altar in the living room, the nursing pillow in the kitchen, the stack of Kelsey's birth plan printouts taped to the fridge. I packed them neatly without ripping or tossing because I didn't need to scream to be clear. I lined the boxes in the hallway just outside the door. 6 of them. I snapped a photo not to post, but to remember. Then I opened our family group text. I hadn't written in it since April. Message. The apartment is no longer available for use. Your belongings are in the hallway. Do not re-enter. I'm serious. No emojis, no sign-off. Just a boundary in black and white. My phone lit up instantly. "Lauren, what the hell? Where's Mom's purse? You can't do this, Kelsey's pregnant. And finally, from my mother, I raised you better than this." That one made me laugh, quiet, bitter, like air escaping a sealed room. I turned the phone face down. Then I walked to the kitchen, boiled water in the kettle I bought the day I moved in, and poured it over a single jasmine tea bag. The scent rose slowly, curling around the quiet. It didn't smell like lavender oil. It smelled like something that belonged to me. They came back 2 days later. Not with keys, they didn't have those anymore, but with fists on the door, voices raised just enough to carry through the hallway without crossing into full spectacle. I watched them through the peephole. My mother, Marjorie Blake, wore her pressed slacks and her Sunday pearls like this was still some kind of church visit. Kelsey leaned against the wall, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding a phone like it might summon sympathy. Her fiancé hovered behind them, rubbing small circles into her back like she was the victim. I didn't open the door. Instead, I slid in my AirPods and let Billie Holiday sing me through their knocking. They stayed for over an hour. When they left, the hallway reeked of perfume and resentment. Later that evening, I got a text from Rachel, my cousin, the only one in the family who had ever told the truth out loud. She wrote, "You okay? They're telling everyone you lost it, that Seattle changed you, that you're on something." I almost dropped my phone. Now I wasn't just cruel. I was unstable, easier to discredit than to confront. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time, it was Uncle Greg. He always spoke in a tone reserved for courtrooms and caskets. "Your mother is very hurt," he began. "Can't you be a little more understanding?" I closed my eyes. "Did she tell you she hosted a blessing ceremony in my home without asking?" I asked. "That she threw out my journals, that they forged my name?" There was a long pause on the line. Then, "Family makes mistakes." That line again. That tired, poisonous refrain. Family makes mistakes. Family means forgiveness. Family first. But no one ever asked what I needed. No one asked why I left in the first place. I hadn't gone to Seattle for a job. I went because I was tired of being the strong one, the one who doesn't mind, the one who always yields. But I did mind. I minded more than they would ever understand. And this time I wasn't yielding. I didn't want to live in a fortress. I wasn't building a wall to keep people out. I was trying to remember how it felt to belong somewhere. So I started with the smallest thing. I still owned the candle. It was tucked in the back of the kitchen drawer behind unused chopsticks and half-melted birthday candles. Jasmine and sandalwood, the one I used to light every Sunday evening before the week began. I placed it on the windowsill and lit the wick. The scent was soft, familiar, mine. Then I called a cleaning crew. They came the next morning, 4 women in dark blue shirts and gloves, armed with tools I'd never owned and energy I couldn't summon. They moved like surgeons, scrubbed away lavender oil from the walls, wiped down the fridge door where sticky handprints lingered in faint pink. They vacuumed the carpet in long, straight lines, lifting out the party confetti that had nested deep in the fibers like it belonged. When they left, the space was hollow in a way that didn't feel empty, it felt open. I repainted the walls, nothing dramatic, just a clean white that caught the morning light the way my dad always said good rooms should. I rehung the photo of him in the hallway next to the bookshelf I rebuilt from scratch. His reading glasses now sat on top untouched but not forgotten. Then I called a designer, not for luxury, for meaning. She listened as I explained what I wanted: a quiet space, a place for writing, for gathering, for remembering. She asked if I wanted to rent it out again, but I shook my head. I want it to be a studio, I said, for women who've been erased. She didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded. 2 weeks later, the space was ready. There were shelves lined with poetry by women who'd survived things they never spoke of. A table with mismatched chairs that invited conversation, not hierarchy. A basket by the door with slippers in every size. I registered it as a nonprofit. I called it the Quiet Room. Not because it was silent, but because it was sacred, because it was the first place I'd ever known where silence didn't mean surrender. And when I sat in the center of that room alone with jasmine in the air and no one asking me to shrink, I realized I hadn't rebuilt the apartment. I'd rebuilt me. The message came as I knew it would. It was a voicemail from my sister Kelsey, her voice sugar-coated with the kind of softness that always arrived just after damage had been done. "Hey, Lauren, just wondering if we could swing by for a couple hours. We, left the bassinet and a few of the gifts. Mom said you'd understand." I stared at the screen, unmoved. Understand what? That I was supposed to hold the door again. That they could erase me, then ring the bell and expect the welcome mat. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to the closet and pulled out the one thing I hadn't returned, tossed, or donated: the guest book from the Blessing Way. It had been sitting at the bottom of a crate, wedged between unused votive candles and a half-inflated balloon. I took it to a local print shop, had the pages rebound in black leather, sharp, clean edges, no flourish. On the inside cover, I wrote in ink, "For every time you tried to erase me from my own life, here's a keepsake of the last day you ever succeeded." I placed the book in a plain cardboard box. No note, no explanation. Then I drove to my mother's house. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I left the box on her porch and walked away. By the time I returned home, the building manager flagged me down. "Miss Blake, that woman you warned us about?" She showed up again. Security footage showed my mother standing in front of the elevator holding the guest book like it burned in her hands. She didn't ask to be let up. She didn't say a word. She just stared at the camera. Then she turned and walked out the front door. They stopped coming. No more knocks. No more voicemails disguised as apologies. No more last-minute invitations to gatherings I was never meant to belong to. Just quiet. I didn't post about it. I didn't text Rachel. I didn't even light the candle that night. I just stood by the window with a glass of orange juice and let the silence settle around me like a soft coat I hadn't worn in years. For the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch when the elevator dinged. I didn't tense at footsteps in the hallway. I wasn't waiting for the next violation. The door stayed closed, and it stayed mine. The building manager said my mother hadn't returned since the day of the guest book. She didn't file a complaint. She didn't follow up. He said she just left. And somehow that was the clearest message she'd ever sent. No tantrum, no spectacle. Just gone. I stood on the balcony that night, the city flickering quietly below me like it was breathing on my behalf. And I whispered just once, not to anyone, not for anyone. "This is mine now." 3 weeks later, I got one last message from Kelsey. It was a photo, her standing in front of our mother's old house keys in one hand, the baby on her hip. The caption read, "Guess who's moving in? Come by if you want to see your niece sometime. She asks about you. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not because I missed her, but because some small part of me still wanted to be missed back. The baby looked like our father, round cheeks, sharp eyes, something unspoken in the way she leaned forward like she was trying to understand the person holding the camera. I felt a tug, not enough to turn around, just enough to recognize that the thread was still there, thin and distant and no longer tangled around my throat. I typed back, "Tell her Auntie says hi," and that she's always in my heart. Then I blocked the number, not out of anger, not to erase her, but to protect the quiet I had finally earned. I poured another glass of juice and leaned against the counter, barefoot hair, unbrushed, no one expecting anything from me. Outside, the sun was rising. It wasn't dramatic. It just arrived like a fact. The kind you stop doubting once you've lived through enough endings. I closed my eyes and listened to nothing, and in that stillness, I heard everything I needed.